Lecture 1, January 16th, 1872. Honored listeners, the topic you have decided to reflect on with me today is so serious, so important, and in a certain sense, so unnerving that I, like you, would listen to anyone who promised to teach me something about it, no matter how young he was, even if it seemed truly implausible on the face of it, that he could achieve anything adequate or appropriate to the task. After all, he might possibly have heard something true about this unnerving question of the future of our educational institutions. And it might be this that he wanted to relay. He might have had worthy teachers, better suited than he to prophesying the future. Prophesying like the Roman haruspices from the entrails of the present. Something of the sort is what I have to offer. One day, due to a combination of unusual but basically innocent circumstances, I overheard two remarkable men talking on just the subject. And the main points they made, along with the whole way they approached the question, impressed themselves so firmly upon my memory that when I consider these matters, I have no choice but to reflect along similar lines. The difference is that I lack the courage and confidence they showed with my hearing, and to my amazement, both in boldly pronouncing forbidden truths and even more boldly constructing their hopes. It would, I thought, be worthwhile to set the conversation down in writing once and for all, so that others might be moved to judgment and be able to discern these striking views and pronouncements. For various reasons, I believe that the present lectures are the proper occasion for so to do. For one thing, I am well aware of where it is that I am presenting this conversation. For general reflection and contemplation, in a city republic that promotes the culture and education of its citizens with uncommon generosity, and on a scale that can only put larger states to shame. Nor truly can I be wrong in assuming that here, where one does so much more for culture and education, one must think about them more as well. The only way I can make myself fully understood is to relate the conversation I overheard to listeners such as are to be found right here. Those who guess at once what can only be hinted at, who fill in what must be left hidden, who, in short, need only to be reminded, not taught. And so, honored listeners, I now present to you my innocent encounter and the somewhat less innocent dialogue between two men I have not yet named. Let us put ourselves in the position of a young student, a condition admirably almost unimaginable in our restless, turbulent times. You must have experienced it personally to find such peace of mind, such wrestling of timeless comfort from the present moment, even possible. I was spending a year in such a state at the university town of Bonn on the Rhine with a friend of my age, a year without any plans or goals, free of all future prospects, in a way that seems almost dreamlike to me now, bracketed as it was before and after by periods of wakefulness. That we lived among people excited by fundamentally different things and striving after fundamentally different goals was of no concern to me or my friend. Occasionally, it was heard to satisfy or refuse the sometimes ardent demands of our cohort. But even this game played against opposing forces. When I think about it now, it is like the experience we all had of certain inhibitions and dreams when you think you can fly, for example, but feel something inexplicably holding you back. My friend and I shared numerous memories from the times of wakefulness we had just passed through. Our time at the Gymnasium, German for high school, I must describe one such memory in some detail here, since it led to my innocent encounter. On an earlier trip to the Rhine in late summer, I had come up with a plan that my friend had independently arrived at as well, in almost the exact same place and at the exact same time, so that we felt practically forced by this unusual coincidence to carry it out. We decided to form a small club with a few schoolmates, an organization imposing certain set obligations on our literary and artistic aspirations. To put it more simply, every one of us would pledge to submit something every month, whether a poem, an essay, an architectural plan, or a piece of music. Every other member could offer candid, friendly criticism. We thought that this mutual oversight would both stimulate our drive for self-cultivation and also keep it within proper limits. And our plan was a success. So much so that ever since, we could only think back on that time and place where the idea first came to us with a certain grateful, even solemn feeling of respect. We soon realized the proper form that we give this feeling. We avowed that every year we would visit that isolated spot near Rondelzek on the anniversary of that late summer day when sitting and thinking next to each other, we had suddenly been inspired in the same exact way. To be honest, we were not very strict about keeping our promise, though, but precisely because we had several sins of omission on our conscience, we made a firm decision during that student year in Bonn, when at last we were living right next to the Rhine, to carry out our self-imposed duty and indulge our grateful excitement. We decided that when the day came, we would visit that spot near Rolandseck with all due ceremony. It was not made easy for us. Our large and pleasure-loving student fraternity tried so hard as it could to keep us from taking flight, pulling with all its strength on every rope that could keep us tied down. The group had planned a big, festive outing to Rolandseck for that very day, at the end of the summer semester, to tighten the bonds among its members and send them home with the best possible memories. It was one of those perfect days that, at least in our climate, only this moment of late summer can produce. Heaven and earth in peaceful harmony, streaming forth in a wonderful mix of sunny warmth, autumnal freshness, and blue infinitude. Dressed in the most colorful, fantastic attire, the kind that only students can wear amid the somber gloom of every other variety of clothing. We boarded a steamship, festooned in our honor, and planted our fraternity's banner on the deck. A shot rang out now and then from another shore of the Rhine, a prearranged signal to keep those living by the river, and especially our host in Rolandseck, informed of our approach. I will refrain from describing our boisterous march from the pier through the excited, curious town. So too the jokes and the games we indulged in, which not everyone would understand. I will pass over the celebratory meal that gradually grew more and more lively, even wild, and the truly unbelievable musical production that the whole fraternity had to take part in. Some performing solo, some in group efforts, and which I, as the fraternity's musical advisor, had rehearsed and now had to conduct. During the chaotic finale, speeding ever faster to its conclusion, I gave my friend a signal, and no sooner had the last chord howled forth than we disappeared, slamming the doors on what you might call a bellowing abyss behind us. Suddenly, the refreshing, breathless silence of nature. The shadows were already longer. The sun glowed motionless, but lower in the sky. A gentle breeze from the glittering green surface of the river blew across our flushed faces. It was only later in that evening that we were performing our pilgrimage of memory, so we had made up our minds to spend the day's last bright moments perusing one of our private hobbies, of which we had so many back then. We were passionate about shooting, something that came in handy later during our military service. The fraternity's valet knew the place where we liked to shoot, far away and higher in the hills, and had brought our pistols there ahead of us. It was on the upper edge of the first low wooded ridge of mountains behind Rolzek, a small, rugged plateau, quite near the place where we had conceived of our club and dedicated ourselves to it. Off to one side was a wooded hillside and an inviting place to sit in its clearing, with a view through the trees and bushes. The beautiful wind curve of the seven mountains, and especially the Drachenfels, traced its line above the horizon, with the trees near our clearing below, while the sparkling Rhine itself, cradling the island of Nonnenwörth in its arms, formed the midpoint of the scene that was like a picture in an oval frame. This was the place, consecrated by our common plans and dreams, to which we intended to retreat that evening, to which we had to retreat if we were to end the day in obedience to our self-imposed law. Nearby on that rugged plateau stood a lone, massive, dead oak, silhouetted against the undulating hills and the open plains. The two of us had once carved a neat pentagram into it, and the storms of the year since had split and swollen the wood, making it a tempting target for our marksmanship. It was already late in the afternoon when we reached our shooting range, and a broad, sharply pointed shallow reached out from our branchless tree trunk across the bare hill of the bare heath. It was very quiet. The tall trees below us blocked our view into the valley. All the more startling then were the sharp, echoing sounds of our pistol shooting ringing out into this solitude. I had just sent the second bullet flying through the pentagram when I felt a strong grip on my arm, and I saw my friend reloading being similarly interrupted. I spun around and saw the enraged face of an old man. Feeling at the same time a great dog leaping upon my back, before we could utter a single word to express our amazement, I, or my friend, that is, who was being accosted likewise by a second younger man, the older man's voice rang out fierce and threatening. No, 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 he shouted, no duels here. You students have less right to duel than anyone. Put away your pistols. Calm down, make up, shake hands. What can the salt of the earth, the great minds of the future, the seed of our hopes, can even they not free themselves from the insane catechism of honor and his law of might makes right? Nothing against your hearts, but this does no honor to your heads. The language and wisdom of Hellas and Latian have been the nursemaids of your youth. Invaluable efforts have been made to illuminate your young minds and hearts with the radiance of glory's antiquities, wisdom, and nobility, and yet you take as your guide the chivalric code of honor, the code of unreason and brutality. Look this code straight on, for once. Think clearly, see through its pitiful limitations, and let your reason, not your passions, be the touchstone. If you do not, then reject it at once. You are not suited for work in our field, which demands a power of judgment that can shatter the shackles of prejudice and a rigorous intellect that can clearly distinguish truth from falsehood, even where the difference between them is deeply obscured, not as obvious as it is here. Go find your way in the world along some other honest path, my good friends. Be soldiers, be craftsmen. A trade in the hand finds gold in every land. A rude speech for all the truth it contained. We answered so heatedly that we kept interrupting each other. So you're wrong, you're wrong. We're not here to fight a duel. We're only here for shooting practice. Don't you know how duels work? You think we would face off in the middle of the woods? In the middle of nowhere? Like two bandits without seconds or doctors or witnesses? Anyway, when it comes to the question of duels, we have our own points of view. Every man for himself. We won't let ourselves be ambushed and frightened by harangues like yours. This reply, not especially polite either, made an ugly impression on the old man. At first, when he realized we were not fighting a duel, he started to look upon us more kindly. But the turn that our words took annoyed him. He muttered and grumbled when we presumed to speak of having views of our own. He grabbed his companion and turned away with a bitter cry. A person needs more than points of view. He needs thoughts, too. The old man's companion burst out. Show some respect. A man like this deserves it, even if he was wrong in this way. My friend had meanwhile reloaded, and with a shout of, "Look out!" he fired at the pentagram again. This burst of noise right behind the old man's back infuriated him. He turned around again, giving my friend a look full of hate, and asked the companion in a softer voice, "Oh, what should we do? These young men and their explosions will be the death of us." The young man looked at us. You should know that your amusing little bursts of gunfire are aimed right at the heart of philosophy this time. Look at the honorable man before you. He has every right to ask you not to shoot here. And when such a gentleman makes a request, then you do what he says, the old man interrupted with a stern look. We didn't know what to make of all of this. It was far from clear what our noisy shenanigans had to do with philosophy, nor why we were supposed to give up our shooting range out of some incomprehensible considerations of politeness. We must have hesitated a moment, indecisive and annoyed. The old man's companion noticed this and explained the situation. We have no choice but to wait here for a couple of hours. We have arranged to meet with an important friend of this important man tonight and chose a peaceful place with a few benches here in the forest for our meeting. It is not very nice being constantly startled by your gunshots, and you will no doubt willingly stop your shooting when I tell you that this man, who has sought out a peaceful, remote place of solitude for a reunion with his friend, is one of our most eminent philosophers. This rejoinder was even more troubling Now we were in danger of losing more than our shooting range. At once we asked, "Where is this peaceful spot of yours? Not over there to the left, is it?" "Oh, yeah, precisely," came the reply. "But that clearing is ours tonight," my friend burst out. "We have to have it," we both cried. At that moment, our long planned celebration was more important to us than all the philosophers in the world, and we insisted so strongly on our seemingly unreasonable demand, expressing ourselves with such insensitivity, with such intensity, resembling ourselves with such intensity that we may have seemed to be a bit ridiculous. Either way, our philosophical gadflies gave us a quizzical smile, as if to say that now we had to explain and excuse ourselves. But we said nothing. The last thing we wanted to do was to betray our secret. So the two pairs stood silently facing each other. An evening red poured out across the sky, lay above the treetops. The philosopher gazed toward the sun, his companion at him, and my friend and I at our scheduled spot in the forest. That it might be taken from us on today of all days, we felt bitter and angry. What good is all the philosophy in the world, we thought, if it prevents us from enjoying some time alone with a friend and keeps us from becoming philosophers ourselves? For we felt that our commemoration was genuinely philosophical in nature. We wanted to make serious resolutions and life plans. We hoped to find in that solitary contemplation something that would shape our innermost souls and satisfy those souls in the future, just as the labors of our youth had done in the past. That was what we had vowed to do, sit there alone in contemplation, as we were doing 5 years earlier, when we had arrived at the same resolve. It was supposed to be a silent ceremony, all memory, all future, the present a mere hyphen between them, and now hostile fate had forced its way into our charmed circle. And we didn't know how to drive it off. In truth, though, there was something mysterious, even exciting, about the strange encounter. While we stood there in two groups, silent and hostile, and the evening clouds grew ever redder overhead, the evening itself ever calmer and milder, while we listened, as it were, to the regular breathing of nature, as it concluded with the satisfaction its day's work. The masterpiece of all perfect consummated day. Just then a boisterous cheer came of many voices, echoed. A cheer of many voices echoed up from the Rhine and tore through the twilight stillness. It could only be our fellow students, probably wanting to take boats out to row on the river. We thought about how the others must have been missing us, and we missed them too. My friend and I raised our pistols at almost the same time, and the echo brought our shots back to us, along with a friendly shout of recognition from below. For we were well known in our fraternity, even notorious for our love of pistol shooting. At the same moment, we realized how terribly rude we were being to the silent philosopher and his philosophical friend. They had stood there calmly observing the scene until our double pistol shot made him jump. We stepped quickly up to them and alternatively cried, "Forgive us." That was our final volley, a signal to our friends on the Rhine. They understood. Can you hear them? If you absolutely need to wait in that spot of the woods, surely we can at least sit there too. There are several benches. We won't bother you. We'll sit quietly. We won't say a word. And it's past 7 o'clock now, and we have to go there. I paused, then added, that sounds more mysterious than it is, but we have made a solemn vow to spend the next hour there. There's a reason. A happy memory makes this place sacred to us, and we hope it will also lay the groundwork for a happy future. For that reason, too, we wouldn't want you to we wouldn't want to leave you with any bad memories, even though we have already disturbed and startled you more than once or twice. The philosopher said nothing, but his young companion spoke. I am afraid our commitments demand that we will be here in the same place and at the same time. There is nothing to be done except ask ourselves whether it is the hand of fate or the work of some mischievous goblin. Well, my friend, the philosopher says, apparently placated, I am better pleased with our pistol-shooting young men than I was before. Did you notice how calm they were while we looked at the sky? They weren't talking, they weren't smoking, they weren't standing quietly. I mean, they were standing quietly. I could almost believe they were reflecting. Suddenly, he turned to us. Were you reflecting on something? Tell me while we walk together to where we will share the moment's rest. We strolled over and clambered down into the warm, shady forest. It had already begun to grow darker there. On the way, my friend spoke candidly and told the philosopher that what he had been afraid of. That today, for the first time, a philosopher might keep him from philosophizing. The old man laughed. What? You were afraid that a philosopher would prevent you from philosophizing? That sort of thing can happen. Indeed, it can happen. Has it not ever happened to you before? Not even at one of your universities. You do go to philosophy lectures, don't you? It was at this uncomfortable question, and it was an uncomfortable question for us, okay? It was at this uncomfortable question. Oh, it was an uncomfortable question for us since we had attended not even one of those such lectures. And like many others, we had the innocent belief that anyone at the university with the office and title of philosopher was, in fact, a true philosopher. We were inexperienced and misinformed back then. We admitted we had never been to any of the philosophy lectures, but said that we certainly planned to make up for that at some point in time. But then what is it that you call, he asked, philosophizing? To this I said, we can't give you an exact definition, but it's something like making a serious effort to reflect on the best way to become truly educated. That is a large task, and also a quite small one, the philosopher growled. Reflect long and hard on it. Here are our benches. Let us sit far apart. The last thing I want to do is to disturb your reflections about how best to become truly educated. I wish you the best of luck and views as in the same question of duels, real, brand new, well-educated personal views. This philosopher does not want to stop you from philosophizing. Just don't startle him with your gunshots. Today, for once, do as the young Pythagoreans did. They had to keep silent for 5 years in the service of genuine philosophy. You are not being asked to even be silent for 5 half hours in the service of this education of yours that you want to so urgently consider. We had reached our destination, and our ceremony of remembrance began. Just as 5 years before, the Rhine swam in a gentle haze. Again, as then, the sky shined. The woods gave off their woodsy smell. The most distant corner of the furthest bench received us. There we sat, almost hidden, so that neither the philosopher nor his companion could see our faces. We were alone. The philosopher's voice was muffled. The rustle of the leaves and the hum of the trees, teeming with the thousandfold life, all but turned his voice into a kind of natural music. It reached us as a murmur, a distant, monotonous sound. We were truly undisturbed. Some time passed. The evening red grew ever paler, and the memory of our youthful educational undertaking rose up before us ever more clearly. We felt that we owed this curious club our greatest gratitude. It had been no mere supplement to our gymnasium studies, if anything, the reverse. The club was that which had truly borne fruit. It had supplied the framework for our quest for education, and we had sketched our formal schooling into it. It was thanks to our club. We knew that we basically never thought about a so-called career back then. All too often, the state tries to exploit those years, luring civil servants it can make use of as early as possible, and then securing their unconditional obedience with exaggeratedly strenuous exams. But our method of self-cultivation had saved us. Practical concerns had not guided us. We felt no need to advance quickly and get on with our careers, so much so that neither of us yet had any idea of what we wanted to be later, or worried about it in the least. A fact that seemed consoling as we sat on our benches. Our club had nurtured this very happy unconcern. If for nothing else, we gave thanks for that carefree spirit with all our heart at this ceremony of ours. I have already said that in the present day, it is almost impossible to believe that anyone could rock oneself in the cradle of the present, not goal-directed at all, content in the moment. If such a condition is possible, it must certainly be reprehensible. Our times are so averse to anything and everything useless, and how useless we were back then. How proud we were not to be of any use. We could have competed for the honor of being the most useless. We did not want to be of any importance, represent anything, achieve anything. We wanted to be without a future, mere do-nothings, lounging on the threshold of the present. And that's what we were. Praise be to us. That is how it seemed to us at the time, honored listeners. Full of such solemn self-contemplation, I was more or less of a mind to answer the question about the future of our personal educational institution for myself. In the same self-satisfied tone, when the nature music issuing from the philosopher's distant bench started to change in character. It grew gradually more insistent, more articulate, and then suddenly I realized I could hear what they were saying and that I was listening, that I was eagerly listening, all ears as it were. I nudged my friend, perhaps as he was dozing off, I couldn't remember, and whispered, "Wake up! There's something for us to learn here. What they're saying applies to us, even if it's not meant for us." What I had heard was the philosopher's young companion defending himself rather excitedly while the philosopher attacked him in an ever more thundering tone of voice. "You have not changed," he shouted. "Alas, you have not changed. I can hardly believe how little difference there is in you between now and 7 years ago, the last time I saw you, when with uncertain hopes, I sent you on your way. Once again, and no pleasant task it is, I have to scrape off this modern veneer of education you've been coated with. And what do I find underneath? The same unchanging, intelligible nature, as Kant would say, but unfortunately the unchanged intellectual nature as well. The latter's immutability probably just as necessary, but less consoling. What is the point of having spent all my life As a philosopher, I wonder if you, someone intelligent and truly eager to learn, could spend so many years with me without them ever making any real impression. You're acting as though you never heard the cardinal principle of education that I turned to over and over again and again and again and again in our earlier discussions so many times. Do you remember what it was? I remember, the reprimanded student answered. You always said that no one would strive for education if they knew how unbelievably small the number of truly educated people actually was or ever could be. But that it was impossible to achieve even this small quota of truly educated people unless a great mass of people were tricked, seduced into going against their nature and pursuing an education. As a result, we must never publicly betray the ridiculous disproportion between the number of truly educated people and the size of our monstrously overgrown educational system. That is the real secret of education, he said. Countless people fight for it, and they think that they're fighting for themselves. But at the bottom of it is only to make education possible for a very few. Ah, that's right, the professor said, and you're capable of forgetting its true lesson. Enough to believe that you were one of the very few yourselves, eh? Because that is what you thought. I can tell. It's part and parcel of the worthless nature of our truly educated times. People democratize the right of genius in order to avoid the true work of culture and demands of education. Anyone and everyone wants to lie back in the shallow of the tree that the genius has planted, while avoiding the hard necessity of working for that genius, of making him possible. You say that you're too proud to want to be a teacher, eh? You despise the crowd of students pressing in on you. You speak disparagingly of the teacher's task, and then angrily defending yourself against that crowd. You want to lead a lonely, solitary life, imitating me and how I live. You think that you can reach at a single bound what I've only managed to achieve at the end of a long and stubborn struggle to live as a philosopher? And you are not afraid that this solitude will have its vengeance upon you? Try to be a hermit of culture. Just try it. I dare you to live for all. Out of oneself alone takes riches indeed. Strange young men, always thinking that they have to imitate precisely what is the highest and most difficult. What only a master can do, while they, of all the people, should know how difficult and dangerous it is, and how many excellent talents might yet perish in the attempt. I do not wish to keep you, or to keep anything from you, my teacher, his companion replied. I have heard too much from you and spent too much time in your presence to devote myself, body and soul, to our current educational and pedagogical regime. I feel too clearly its hopeless errors and defects, which you have so often pointed out, and yet I see myself all too little of the strength I would need to prevail in a valiant struggle. I felt totally discouraged. My flight into solitude wasn't arrogance, neither was it presumption. Let me tell you what I think characterizes the vital and pressing educational and pedagogical question of today. It seems to me we need to distinguish between two dominant tendencies in our educational institutions, apparently opposed but equally ruinous in effect, and eventually converging in their end results. The first is the drive for the greatest possible expansion and dissemination of education. And the other is the drive for narrowing and weakening of education. For various reasons, education is supposed to reach the widest possible circle. Such is the demand of the first tendency, But then the second tendency expects education to give up its own highest, noblest, loftiest claims and content itself with serving some other form of life. For instance, the state. I think I know where the loudest and clearest call for the maximum expansion of education is coming from. Expansion is one of the favorite national economic dogmas of the day. As much knowledge and education as possible, leading to the greatest possible production and demand, leading to the greatest happiness. That's the formula. Here we have utility as the goal and purpose of education, and more precisely, gain the highest possible income. From this point of view, education essentially means acquiring the discernment that keeps a man up to date, tells him all the ways to most easily make money, gives him power over the various channels along which individuals and peoples conduct their business. The true task of education in this view is to form people who are, as the French say, au courant, the same way a coin is current, valid currency. The more of these circulating people there are, the happier the nation is as a whole, and that is the goal of the modern educational institutions, to make everyone as quote-unquote current as it lies in his nature so to be, to train everyone to convert his innate capacity for knowledge and wisdom, whatever it may be, into such happiness and income as possible. Everyone has to be able to give an exact appraisal of himself, has to determine exactly how much he has the right to demand from life. The link between intelligence and property that this view alleges is practically an ethical demand. Those who hold to this view hate any education that makes a person go his own way, or that suggests goals above and beyond earning money, or that takes a lot of time. They even try to dismiss these different educational ideas as higher egotism or unethical educational Epicureanism. What the moral code operating here demands is the exact opposite: a rapid education, so that you can start earning money quickly, and at the same time so thorough enough of an education so that you can earn lots of money. Culture is tolerated only insofar as it serves the cause of earning money, but that much culture is also demanded. In short, humanity has a necessary claim to earthly happiness, and that is why education is necessary. But that's the only reason why. I would like to say something here, the philosopher said. This perspective, which you have described so clearly, gives rise to a great, even monstrous danger. That at some point the masses will jump over the middle step and run straight after earthly happiness. This is what people today call the social question. In other words, it may seem to these masses that education for the greatest number of people is merely a means to earthly happiness of the few, and nothing more. Striving for universal education weakens education so much that it can no longer bestow any privileges or be worthy of any respect at all. The most universal education of all, for instance, is barbarism. Is it not? But I do not want to interrupt your argument. His companion went on again. Aside from this beloved nationalistic economic doctrine, there are other motives for the expansion of education that we see so many people so valiantly advocating for. There are countries where the fear of religious oppression is so widespread and anxiety about the consequences of this oppression so pronounced that people in every class of society thirst for education and gulp down whatever parts of education will dissolve in religious instincts. Elsewhere, it is occasionally the state that tries to promote as widespread of an education as possible in its own interest, since it feels strong enough to clamp back down onto the mightiest unleashing of education. And it has found again and again that a well-educated civil service or military helps it compete against other states. In this latter case, the foundation of the state has to be broad and firm enough to support the complex, delicately balanced arch of education. And the former case, the history of religious oppression, must be tangible enough to necessitate so desperate a countermeasure. In short, whenever the masses sound the war cry of universal popular education, I try to decide whether it rises from a rampant drive to acquire possessions, the stigma of previous religious oppression, or the calculating self-interest of the state. On the other hand, I hear another tune being struck up from various sides, not as loud, but at least as empathetic, that of the narrowing of education. People of any academic circle will hum a snatch of this tune in your ear. The universally acknowledged fact that the current system reduces scholars to be mere slaves of academic disciplines, making it a matter of chance and increasingly unlikely for any scholar to turn out truly educated. Academic study is spread across such a large area now that anyone with real and unexceptional talents and academic ambitions will devote himself to a narrowly specialized subfield, remaining totally unconcerned with everything else. As a result, even if he stands above the vulgar masses within this subfield, he belongs fully with them in everything else, in everything important. A scholar with such a rare field specialty is like a factory worker who spends his entire life doing nothing but making one single screw or a handle or, for a given tool or a machine, or a handle for a given tool or machine. A task in which he will obviously become an incredible virtuoso. In Germany, where they know how to drape such painful facts in the glorious cloak of an idea, this narrow specialization among scholars, this straying ever further from true education, is praised even in moral terms. Attention to detail or industrious drudgery is celebrated above all else, while lacking all culture outside one's own field is a badge of honor, a sign of noble moderation. There have been centuries when it was self-evident that scholars were truly educated and the truly educated were scholars. We would be hard-pressed to equate the two now, given the lesson of our time. The premise now accepted everywhere and resisted nowhere is that people should be exploited to serve science and scholarship. Does anyone ask whether a scholarly discipline that consumes its creatures so vampirically is worth it? In practical terms, the academic division of labor is doing just what religious times tried to do. Diminish education, even destroy it. For certain religions, given their origins and history, this may be a perfectly reasonable goal. But for scholarship, it may well be suicidal. We are already at the point where the scientist or academic as such has nothing to say about any serious general question, especially the deepest philosophical problems, while a gluey mass that has worked its way into and between all the sciences, journalism exists precisely to address such questions. Journalism fulfills its task according to its nature and, as its name suggests, a day labor. It is in journalism that the two tendencies converge, education's expansion and also its narrowing. The daily newspaper has effectively replaced education, and everyone who still lays claim to culture or education, even a scholar, typically relies on a sticky layer of journalism, a substance as sturdy and permanent as the paper it's printed on, to grout the gap between every form of life, every social position, every art, every science, every field. The newspaper epitomizes the goals of today and the goals of today's educational system, just as the journalist, servant of the present moment, has taken the place of the genius, our salvation from the moment, and leader for the ages. Now you tell me, my most excellent master, how I could hope to fight the inversion and perversion of all true striving for education that we now find dominant everywhere. How much courage can I, as one lone teacher, have when I know full well that the steamroller of pseudo-education will crush every seed of true education I cast? Think how useless a teacher's greatest labors are now when he tries to lead a single student back to the infinitely distant and elusive Hellenic world, the true homeland of our culture. And an hour later, that same student reaches for a newspaper or popular novel or one of those scholarly books whose style bears the repulsive mark of today's educational barbarism. Enough, the philosopher cried. Enough! He cried at this point in a strong, sympathetic voice. I understand you better now, and I should not have spoken so harshly before. You're right about everything except your discouragement. Now, let me tell you something that will give you some solace.